Welcome, the anointed ones. Some people should have minded their business, because they had no idea they were poking a peaceful soul with a warrior spirit. From the very beginning, you were the plot twist in a story they thought they controlled, the kind of presence that looks harmless on the surface, quiet, observant, unbothered. But underneath, there's a level of spiritual intelligence that can flip an entire situation without raising a single eyebrow. And the funny thing? They really believed they were the ones running laps around you. Meanwhile, you were sitting there like, bless your heart, you have no idea what you're dealing with. Here's a fact that fits perfectly with your life. Research shows that the most underestimated people are often the most perceptive because they spend more time watching than performing. And that's exactly why the people who thought they had you figured out are now confused, embarrassed, and spiritually winded. They walked into the ring thinking you were soft. They walked out realizing they just sparred with a spiritual assassin disguised as the nice one. See, you didn't come into rooms loud or demanding attention. You didn't announce your power, your insight, or your ability to read someone's intentions faster than they could finish their sentence. You let people underestimate you. You let them think you were clueless. You let them assume your quietness equal weakness. You let them run their little games, their pre-planned strategies, their sneaky tactics, all while you were 3 steps ahead, stretching and drinking water like, is this really what we're doing? And now the twist has finally hit them. You weren't confused. You weren't lost. You weren't naive. You were calculating, spiritually, intuitively, energetically. You fooled them without even intending to. Simply by being who you are, you forced people to reveal themselves. And when the masks fell, when the games backfired, when their strategies collapsed like cheap furniture, they finally realized who you truly were. Not the soft target they imagined, not the easy prey they expected, but the one soul in the room they should have never underestimated. The spiritual strategist, the silent evaluator, the quiet judge who sees everything and reacts to nothing until it's time to strike with precision. They never suspected you. And that was their biggest mistake. Number 1, they misread your quietness because they didn't know you were studying their souls. People often think quietness means you're clueless, scared, or out of the loop, but in your case, your silence was the most advanced form of intelligence in the room. While everyone else was trying to prove themselves, show off, dominate conversations, or throw subtle jabs to see how you'd react, you stayed still long enough to see who they really were. You weren't quiet because you were intimidated. You were quiet because you were collecting truth. And the truth always talks louder when you let people expose themselves. You didn't need to guess motives. You watched how someone's eyes shifted when they lied. You noticed how a person's energy changed when someone else got praised. You paid attention to the tone people used when they thought you weren't paying attention. And the funny thing? They genuinely thought you weren't catching anything. They believed your calmness meant you were unaware, but all it meant was that you were saving your energy for the final outcome instead of wasting it on their theater. You saw who envied you long before they tried to hide it. You saw who pretended to like you, who competed with you secretly, who copied you, who underestimated you, who wanted access to your kindness without offering any real loyalty. You watched it all like a quiet observer at the edge of the room, and because you didn't react or expose anything, they confidently kept showing their true colors. Your silence didn't protect them. It exposed them to themselves. The shocking part for them wasn't that you knew. It was how well you knew. When you finally stepped back, cut ties, moved differently, or made a choice that forced them to face themselves, they were stunned. They couldn't understand how you saw right through their actions when they worked so hard to disguise them. What they never realized is that your quietness wasn't a lack of awareness. It was your advantage. You weren't trying to win arguments. You were studying character. You were mapping intentions. You were decoding patterns. And by the time they realized what you truly understood, the game was already over, because you had already made your silent exit with every truth they thought you missed. Number 2, your discernment wasn't emotional. It was anatomical. Your ability to read people didn't come from being sensitive or overly emotional. It came from something far deeper and far sharper. You don't just notice behavior, you notice the structure behind it. The way some people read body language, you read spirit language. You pick up on intentions the same way others pick up on facial expressions. It's like you've always had this internal scanner that breaks a person down into their true parts, even when they're pretending to be something they're not. Most people react to what someone says. You react to what someone means. And that's why you've always been hard to fool. Emotional manipulation doesn't work on you because your intuition doesn't get clouded by flattery, guilt-tripping, or theatrics. You don't get distracted by the surface-level charm, the forced humility, the fake innocence, or the well-rehearsed kindness. You see the architecture beneath all that, the real motive, the hidden desire, the unspoken resentment. You see the blueprint, not the paint job. People often thought you were too deep or overthinking, not realizing you were picking up layers they weren't even aware they were showing. It's not that you're paranoid, you just see the small things that reveal the whole person, the tone that gives away the jealousy, the hesitation that exposes the lie, the unnecessary explanation that reveals guilt. The sudden shift in energy that tells you their intentions changed before their words do. Your discernment has saved you more times than you can count, and most of the people who underestimated you never realized how close they came to getting caught. They thought you were emotional, but you were analytical in a way they couldn't understand. You weren't reacting, you were reading. You weren't guessing, you were confirming. You weren't suspicious, you were accurate. And what shocked people the most was how effortlessly you knew things they never told you. How you could see through situations they thought they'd disguised. How you could detach from someone before the betrayal even happened. You sensed the cracks in their spirit long before their behavior exposed them. Your discernment wasn't a feeling. It was a built-in truth detector that never stopped working, and that's why nothing gets past you for long. Number 3. They thought you were soft until they realized you don't fight like a human. People love to underestimate what they can't categorize. They saw your calmness, your ability to step back, your refusal to get dragged into petty drama, and immediately labeled you as soft. They assumed that because you didn't yell, argue, or compete on their level, you lacked power or presence. What they didn't realize was that your restraint wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And strategy, when fully realized, is always more dangerous than blind aggression. You don't fight in ways people are used to. You don't lash out in anger or meet every attack with a mirrored insult. Instead, you dismantle situations with precision, targeting the very foundations that hold someone's confidence, schemes, or manipulations together. Your retaliation isn't loud or messy. It's surgical. It hits the vulnerable points they didn't even know existed, leaving them exposed and confused, questioning everything they thought they controlled. By the time they realize what's happening, they're already entangled in the consequences of their own actions. The beauty of your approach is that it's almost invisible. You don't create chaos, you remove the support that sustains it. People panic because they've been trained to fight against obvious attacks, not invisible currents they can't detect. You operate like a force they never expected, a presence that watches, calculates, and executes with perfect timing. They were busy trying to provoke reactions, thinking that anger or manipulation could corner you. And all the while you were observing, learning, and waiting. The shock comes when they see the aftermath of your actions. No shouting, no dramatics, no wasted energy, just results. Relationships collapse, lies unravel, and hidden intentions get exposed, all without you raising your voice. The realization hits them like a cold wave. They were never fighting a person. They were up against an intelligence, a precision, a level of control that doesn't play by human rules. They thought you were soft. They thought you were harmless. And that misjudgment is exactly why your presence terrifies them now. You fight in a way they cannot understand, and by the time they try to respond, they are already outmaneuvered, outclassed, and outlasted. Number 4. Your presence silently revealed their hidden envy and rot. Some people believe that charm, lies, and clever manipulation can hide what's really inside them. They think they can control how they're perceived, that their secrets will stay buried as long as they keep up the act. But when you walk into a room, nothing stays hidden. Your presence has a way of quietly exposing what people spend years trying to mask. You don't need to say anything or confront anyone. Simply being there forces the truth out of them, and that truth usually smells like envy, insecurity, and the bitterness of unmet expectations. They were comfortable acting superior, feeling untouchable, and thinking they could run games without consequence. Meanwhile, you were absorbing everything, watching the micro-expressions, noticing the subtle shifts in tone, picking up on the hidden tremors of fear or jealousy they didn't even know they were showing. Every forced smile, every overcompensation, every carefully crafted compliment became a revelation to you, proof of the cracks in their armor. They were busy managing their masks, while you were quietly reading the manual of their intentions. What terrifies people most is that this isn't obvious. You don't make a scene. You don't point fingers or call anyone out. Your power is in your stillness and your quiet observation. People feel their own inner rot being reflected back at them, and they panic because no one else is pointing it out. They thought they were safe, that their envy or dishonesty was subtle, but your energy makes subtlety impossible. Their flaws are amplified in your presence, and they can't hide from themselves, which makes them hate you silently, even as they try to stay composed. By the time they realize it, the damage is already done. Their illusions of superiority crumble, their self-confidence wavers, and they begin second-guessing every move. All of this happened without a single word from you. You simply existed in a way that forced authenticity to rise, and the envy, bitterness, and hidden rot they carried came spilling out on their own. That is why your presence terrifies them more than confrontation ever could. You don't expose them. You reveal the truth they thought they could bury, and that truth is far more dangerous than any fight. Number 5. You were never outnumbered. They were outcalculated. People love to believe that numbers give them power. They think a crowd can overwhelm a single person, that loud voices and multiple opinions can drown out a quiet observer. They assumed that you, being fewer in number or standing alone, were vulnerable. What they didn't realize is that your strength doesn't come from the size of your support. It comes from the precision of your understanding. While they relied on quantity, you relied on quality, and that made all the difference. Every move they made, every plan they executed, every alliance they formed was predictable to you because you weren't reacting emotionally. You weren't chasing after their games. You were observing, calculating, and anticipating the outcomes. You didn't need more people to back you up because your insight acted like a shield and your timing acted like a weapon. You didn't need chaos to win. You needed clarity, and that was always on your side. They underestimated you because they equated power with volume. They thought being louder, more visible, and more connected automatically made them stronger. They didn't consider that intelligence, patience, and discernment could completely neutralize their advantage. While they were busy trying to impress, manipulate, or intimidate, you were quietly mapping the terrain, understanding the psychology of each person, and knowing exactly where to step, when to move, and how to disengage without ever losing control. The beauty of being outcalculated is that they never realize what hit them until it's too late. They assumed they were leading the charge, but you were controlling the flow from the shadows. You turned their numbers into noise, their alliances into confusion, and their confidence into doubt. They were never really in control. They were playing on a board where every move had already been anticipated, every strategy anticipated, and every weakness accounted for. By the time they realized the truth, it was obvious. The supposed crowd advantage was meaningless. You were never outnumbered because the game was never about size. It was about strategy, foresight, and the patience to let them reveal themselves. In the end, they were defeated by what they never saw coming: your mind. Number 6, you didn't expose them because you wanted peace, not because you were powerless. Most people think silence equals weakness, but in your case, it was the ultimate form of control. You could have exposed every lie, every hidden agenda, every manipulation they tried to hide, but you didn't. Not because you didn't have the power, but because exposing them wasn't necessary. You weren't in a rush to prove a point or claim victory. You knew that revealing the truth too soon often gives people a chance to defend themselves, to twist the narrative, to recover before the consequences fully hit. Patience, not impulse, was your real weapon. You observed them silently, allowing their true nature to unfold on its own. Their schemes, their envy, their betrayals, everything came to light in ways that even they couldn't control. You didn't have to intervene because people naturally reveal themselves when they think no one is paying close attention. And while they believed you were passive, they didn't understand that you were patiently calculating, waiting for the exact moment when the truth would have the most impact without any additional effort from you. This is where your power really shows. You chose restraint over chaos. You let people stumble, lie, and manipulate, all while you maintained your integrity and composure. You didn't need to scream or accuse. Your ability to step back and let the natural consequences of their actions play out was more devastating than any attack you could have launched. They were effectively trapped by their own behavior, and you were simply the witness, the silent force ensuring the truth landed exactly where it needed to. By the time they realized what had happened, it was too late. Your restraint had turned into revelation, your patience had become proof, and their exposure had become undeniable. They never imagined that someone who appeared so calm and detached could be so powerful in their stillness. You weren't powerless, you were untouchable in a way they couldn't comprehend. Every lie they told, every secret they tried to hide, and every manipulation they attempted fell apart on its own. You didn't have to do anything, and that's why your silence hit harder than any confrontation ever could. Number 7, you carried a mirror. They mistook for innocence. People always assumed you were naive, that you were harmless, that your kindness made you an easy target. They didn't see the truth. You were carrying a mirror, one that reflected back exactly who they were, their intentions, their lies, and their weaknesses. And they had no idea. They thought they could test you, manipulate you, or push boundaries without consequence, never realizing that every move they made was being silently documented, analyzed, and reflected right back at them. Your so-called innocence wasn't gullibility, it was strategy. You allowed people to think they had the upper hand, to believe they could outsmart or outmaneuver you, all while you quietly observed how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. Every subtle lie, every attempt to deceive, every manipulation they thought was invisible became glaringly obvious in your eyes. And when the mirror finally reflected their actions back, they were stunned. They couldn't understand how someone so calm, composed, and seemingly soft had seen everything. This mirror you carried didn't just reveal intentions, it exposed character. People realized too late that their own energy, their envy, and their hidden motives were now laid bare. They had walked into a space thinking they were testing you, thinking they were measuring your limits, but in reality, they were being measured themselves. Every flaw, every lie, every weakness became undeniable, and there was nothing they could do to hide it. The brilliance of your approach is that it's invisible until the moment it's undeniable. You don't need to call anyone out or confront them. You don't need to create drama or escalate tension. The mirror works on its own because it reflects truth, and truth, especially when unexpected, hits harder than anything else. They underestimated you because they saw only the surface. They mistook your calmness for innocence, your patience for weakness, and your observation for ignorance. But in reality, you were always the one in control, holding up the mirror and letting them destroy themselves without lifting a finger. By the time they realized it, they were already exposed, humbled, and unable to argue with the reflection they never wanted to see. Number 8. Your spirit has a way of triggering the demons people hide. You've always had this inexplicable effect on people, the kind that makes them squirm in ways they can't explain. It's not your words, your actions, or even your presence in the usual sense. It's something deeper, something energetic. Your spirit interacts with theirs in a way that forces hidden truths, suppressed anger, and long-buried envy to rise to the surface. People around you don't just feel uncomfortable, they feel exposed in ways they never expected. They didn't realize that what they've been hiding, the parts of themselves they've been ashamed of or trying to control, can't withstand your energy. This isn't about intimidation or manipulation. You don't need to provoke them intentionally. Your energy simply exists in alignment, in clarity, in honesty, and it acts like a catalyst. People who are used to living behind masks or hiding their insecurities suddenly find those masks slipping. They start showing frustration for no reason, envy for no reason, or aggression for no reason. But you know the reason. Their demons are responding to your presence because your energy doesn't accommodate deception. What makes this even more powerful is that you aren't doing it consciously. You're not trying to trigger anyone. You're simply being fully yourself, authentic, unshakable, observant, and aligned. That authenticity shines through like a spotlight, and anyone who carries darkness within them can't stand it. They reveal themselves without realizing it. Their insecurities, lies, and manipulations begin to unravel naturally, as if your energy forces the truth to surface. And the best part? People don't know why it's happening. They can't put their finger on it. They just feel unsettled, irritated, or even scared around you. That confusion, that silent panic, is exactly what gives you an advantage. While they're busy confronting their own demons, you remain untouchable, unaffected, and fully in control. They never anticipated that your mere existence could expose what they've worked so hard to hide. By the time they recognize what's happening, it's too late. Their secrets, weaknesses, and hidden intentions are already visible, and there's nothing they can do to cover them up. Number 9, you don't attack people, you attack patterns. The reason people fear you isn't because you lash out or make noise. It's because you see the deeper structure behind their actions, the repetitive cycles they don't even recognize themselves. You don't waste energy on surface-level conflict or short-term drama. You focus on the pattern, the behavior, the manipulation, the deceit that repeats itself over time. While they are busy reacting to minor confrontations, you are dissecting the system that allows those confrontations to exist in the first place. That's why your presence feels like a threat they can't identify. They don't realize they're not being attacked personally. They're being dismantled structurally. You notice habits, tendencies, and predictable choices that everyone else overlooks. When someone continually lies, manipulates or schemes, you're not fixated on one instance of their behavior. You track the pattern, analyze the root, and identify the vulnerabilities that sustain it. That's why your moves are precise and almost surgical. People may try to blame you for their exposure, but in reality, they're just colliding with the consequences of their own repeated actions. You didn't strike randomly, you struck where the cycle would inevitably collapse. Your ability to attack patterns rather than people also means you don't waste energy on emotional drama. You detach from ego, pride, and revenge. You don't get caught up in the chaos others create because you're always seeing the bigger picture. When someone repeatedly tries to manipulate or control, you neutralize the system that enables them. You remove the foundation of their power quietly, without them realizing until it's too late. That's what makes you terrifyingly effective. People can't predict your moves because you're not playing the same game. They think they're dealing with a person they can challenge or outsmart, but you're operating on a level beyond their perception. You're not fighting humans, you're correcting equations, unraveling sequences, and exposing repetitive structures that nobody else has the patience or insight to confront. When the collapse happens, it feels instantaneous to them, but it's the result of careful observation, strategic patience, and understanding the patterns they never noticed they were trapped in. Number 10. You outsmarted them without ever competing with them. People always assumed that winning meant fighting, arguing, or proving yourself in their arena. They thought the only way to measure strength or intelligence was to match them move for move, to react to their chaos, or to participate in their games. What they never understood is that you operate on an entirely different plane. You don't compete with people because competition assumes equality, and they were never on your level to begin with. While they were exhausting themselves trying to trap you or manipulate outcomes, you were calmly observing, analyzing, and quietly maneuvering without ever stepping into their game. The beauty of your approach is in its invisibility. They thought they were testing you, pushing boundaries and measuring your reactions, but in reality, you were watching them self-destruct. Every lie they told, every scheme they orchestrated, every attempt to provoke or intimidate was feeding your understanding of their patterns. You didn't have to respond because their own actions were giving you all the information you needed. By the time you made a move, it wasn't a reaction. It was inevitability. You didn't just stay ahead, you anticipated, redirected, and neutralized without them realizing how far behind they were. People are shocked because they expect noise, confrontation, and drama from someone they perceive as a threat. What they didn't account for is that you don't need chaos to win. Your victories are quiet, but absolute. They unfold in ways that make them question everything they thought they knew, leaving them bewildered, humbled, and completely exposed. They never saw it coming because you weren't competing on their level. You were operating on a plane they couldn't even perceive. By not engaging in their battles, by refusing to validate their games, and by observing strategically, you made their efforts irrelevant. They exhausted themselves while you conserved energy, clarity, and focus. When the final outcome revealed itself, they were stunned to realize that they were outsmarted without ever noticing a confrontation. Your intelligence wasn't loud, it wasn't reactive, and it wasn't humanly predictable. That is why you remain untouchable, misunderstood, and entirely ahead of everyone trying to catch up. Number 11. They couldn't defeat you because you don't need validation to function. One of the reasons people failed to touch you, manipulate you, or control you is simple. You don't operate on approval, attention, or recognition. While most people measure their worth by how others see them, you measure yourself by truth, purpose, and alignment. You aren't trying to prove anything to anyone, and that alone makes you untouchable. People who rely on ego, envy, or manipulation to gain power over others can't compete with someone who has no need for validation because their usual levers of influence are useless against you. They underestimated the quiet strength of someone who functions independently of outside approval. They tried to provoke you, test your patience, or manipulate your reactions, expecting that they could elicit insecurity or doubt. But you were operating on an internal compass that never wavers, that doesn't bend to the whims of others, and that doesn't get distracted by criticism or praise. You weren't defensive or reactive because nothing they said or did could change how you view yourself or how you operate in the world. This self-sufficiency isn't arrogance, it's clarity. You don't need permission to exist, to act, or to pursue what matters to you. That clarity is magnetic and frightening at the same time. People instinctively feel powerless because they realize they don't have the tools to influence you. Their attempts at manipulation, intimidation, or control fail repeatedly, leaving them frustrated, confused, and bitter. They are used to exerting influence over those who crave attention, admiration, or acceptance. But you don't. You operate outside of their framework entirely. And the most powerful part? Your independence allows you to move without hesitation, strike with precision, and withdraw without explanation. You can disengage from toxicity, avoid traps, and let consequences unfold naturally, all because you're not dependent on others to validate your decisions or worth. In their eyes, it looks effortless, but it's rooted in a deep, unshakable understanding of self. That is why they couldn't defeat you, not because you fought harder or louder, but because you don't need them to function, and nothing they do can change that fundamental truth. Number 12. They never realized you were testing them the entire time. Most people believe that they are the ones in control, that they can test others, push boundaries, and measure reactions. They assumed you were unaware, passive, or naive, thinking every interaction was just casual, harmless, or inconsequential. What they didn't know is that you were quietly observing, analyzing, and evaluating everything they did. Every word they spoke, every gesture they made, every little maneuver to gain an advantage. You were taking it all in, filing it away, and studying it with the precision of someone who doesn't need a fight to understand the truth. You weren't reacting impulsively because your goal wasn't confrontation. It was insight. You allowed them to show themselves without interference. Their lies, envy, manipulations, and pretenses became the evidence you needed. By giving them room to act freely, you exposed patterns and intentions that they thought were hidden. Every little slip, every subtle hint, every attempt at control became a confirmation of what you already suspected. They never realized that their behaviors were the tests, and your calm observation was the final exam. This gave you a power they couldn't comprehend. They believed they were reading you, figuring you out, and testing your limits. But in reality, the roles were reversed. You were watching how they handled themselves when they thought no one was paying attention. You learned who they could trust, who they would betray, who was petty, and who was genuinely loyal. You were mapping their character quietly, methodically, and without the pressure of needing to react in real time. And when the results of your tests finally manifested, when their schemes collapsed, lies were revealed, or boundaries were crossed one too many times, they were shocked. They had been the ones under examination all along, and they had failed without ever realizing it. Your patience and subtlety allowed them to reveal themselves naturally, and the consequences landed perfectly because you never had to intervene overtly. They thought they were controlling the game, but in truth, they were answering questions you were asking without speaking a word. And that is why your wisdom, patience, and quiet strategy always put you several steps ahead of anyone who underestimated you. Number 13. You don't strike first. You strike final. The people who underestimated you always assumed that action equals power, that being first to react or attack proves strength. They never understood that timing is more lethal than speed, and that patience is more powerful than aggression. You don't rush to respond. You don't jump into fights, arguments, or conflicts just to prove a point. Instead, you observe, you calculate, and you wait. You let people expend energy, make mistakes, and reveal themselves fully before you ever take action. By the time you strike, it's final, precise, and irreversible, and that's why it terrifies them. Your power lies in your restraint. Every word, every move, every decision is intentional. While others are frantic, reactive, and short-sighted, you're watching the full pattern of behavior, seeing the consequences that will inevitably unfold. You allow situations to play out naturally, and in doing so, people often destroy themselves without realizing it. They think they're in control, but their miscalculations only clarify the path for your final move. It isn't about proving dominance in the moment. It's about enforcing truth and balance in a way that's undeniable. When you finally act, it isn't impulsive or emotional, it's surgical. It dismantles deception, exposes hidden motives, and closes chapters that were left open for far too long. The aftermath leaves people stunned because they never saw it coming. They were too busy assuming you were passive or slow to react. They misread your patience for weakness. But what they didn't know is that your timing amplifies the impact of every choice you make. Your strike isn't just an action. It's the consequence of everything they revealed while thinking you were watching quietly. People fear you not because you fight louder or faster, but because when you finally do act, it's absolute. There's no second chance, no explanation needed, no negotiation. Your strike finalizes the outcome, and they are forced to reckon with the full weight of their own actions. By the time they understand, it's too late. You were never rushed, never desperate, and never out of control. You simply wait, observe, and strike with an inevitability they cannot escape. Number 14. The real shock was that you were never the victim. You were the hidden judge. People always assumed that because you stayed quiet, absorbed insults, or let others manipulate situations, you were vulnerable. They believed they could push you, test your patience, or take advantage of your perceived softness. What they didn't realize is that while they were busy seeing themselves as the ones in control, you were silently observing, weighing, and judging every action, word, and intention. You weren't a passive participant in their games. You were the unseen authority, quietly measuring whether they deserved access to your life, your trust, and your energy. Every attempt they made to undermine you became evidence in the judgment you had already begun. You weren't reactive because your position didn't require it. Their lies, envy, manipulations, and selfishness weren't just noticed. They were catalogued. You were quietly assessing patterns, testing character, and recording behavior. You weren't waiting to fight back. You were waiting for them to fully expose themselves so that your decisions could carry the weight of undeniable truth. In other words, you allowed them to fail themselves, and that failure spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. The shock for them comes from the realization that everything they thought they were doing to you was meaningless. They assumed they had power because they acted first, spoke louder, or manipulated faster. But the power was never theirs. It was always yours, hidden in patience, discernment, and unwavering clarity. When they finally see the outcome, the boundaries you enforce, the consequences of their own actions, the absence of your energy in their lives, they are stunned. They expected a victim. They found a judge. You didn't have to raise your voice, argue your point, or defend yourself, because your judgment wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about protecting your integrity, aligning with truth, and letting natural consequences manifest. They underestimated the depth of your awareness, the precision of your patience, and the quiet force of your discernment. The real shock is that they were never the victors in the situation, and you were never their prey. You were the hidden judge, and that revelation hits harder than anything they could have anticipated. Everything we've explored here reveals a truth that many will never fully understand. Being underestimated isn't a weakness, it's a weapon. You've moved through situations with quiet strength, precision, and patience that others could never detect. You've observed, analyzed, and understood motives, patterns, and hidden intentions in ways that make your presence not just noticed, but unavoidable. You didn't need to react, argue, or fight to prove your power, because your power has always been in your awareness, your discernment, and your ability to let people reveal themselves while you remained calm, steady, and unshakable. From silently studying souls to exposing hidden envy, from dismantling patterns rather than people to striking not first but final, your journey has been one of quiet mastery. You've been the hidden strategist, the observer who turns manipulation into evidence, the quiet force that makes chaos collapse naturally. People thought they could play games with you, test you, or underestimate you, and yet every single time they fell into the consequences of their own choices while you stood back, patient, calculating, and unbothered. You were never a victim. You were never powerless. You were always in control, seeing clearly, acting deliberately, and executing with precision when the moment demanded it. This isn't just about being one step ahead. It's about understanding the depth of your own strength and the brilliance of your strategy. It's about recognizing that quietness, patience, discernment, and alignment are not signs of weakness, but markers of unshakable power. Those who doubted you, underestimated you, or tried to manipulate you are now facing the truth. You were never what they thought you were. You were the hidden judge, the silent observer, the force they could not see, and that is what makes your presence unforgettable, unavoidable, and unstoppable. If this resonated with you and opened your eyes to the deeper truths of your power, make sure you stay connected. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss these insights. Hit the like button to show your energy aligns with the truth. Leave a comment to share your experiences, because your story matters. And don't forget to share this video. The world needs to witness the strength of the unseen, the quiet, and the extraordinary. Stay alert, stay powerful, and remember, your silence has always been louder than their noise. God bless you.